She had always loved music. From a very young age, it seemed like the piano was the one place where she felt completely herself. Even when everything around her felt confusing or noisy, the moment her fingers touched the keys, the world seemed to pause. The soft notes, the rhythm flowing from her heart to her hands, it was like magic she could control. But for a long time, her music was something private, something she shared only with herself. She practiced in the corners of her small apartment, softly, almost apologetically, as if the notes themselves were too precious to be heard by anyone else. It was a quiet morning when the call came. The voice on the other end was warm and friendly, a little hurried, almost flustered. She was invited to play at a local recital. It wasn't a huge event, nothing fancy or televised. Just a small gathering of music lovers at a community hall. But for her, it felt like a chance, a step into a world she had only ever imagined from her small corner. The caller explained that the program needed someone to fill a short gap and suggested a simple tune. Nothing complicated, just something light and easy for the audience to enjoy. She listened quietly, nodding along as the words filled her ears, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest. A simple tune. That didn't sound like a challenge at all. It sounded easy, almost trivial. But somehow, the idea of performing in front of people, even for something simple, made her stomach tighten. She hadn't played in front of an audience in years. The last time she had done so, it had been a school recital. And she could still remember the way her hands shook, how the notes didn't always sound like she wanted them to. And yet, there was something in her that thrilled at the idea. After the call ended, she sat down at her piano, her fingers hovering above the keys. She thought about the simple tune she was supposed to play. In her mind, she heard it the way it was described, soft, gentle, almost forgettable. But her imagination didn't stop there. As she played the first few notes, she noticed her fingers moving in ways they hadn't in years, adding tiny flourishes, small trills, little decorations that made the melody dance in ways the original tune hadn't suggested. Her heart raced. She wasn't supposed to do anything fancy. She was only asked to play something simple, and yet the music that came out of her piano felt alive, almost as if it had its own spirit. She stopped and laughed softly, a little embarrassed at herself. "It's just a simple tune," she murmured. Nothing more. And yet she couldn't resist the temptation to explore it, to see how far she could go with it without breaking the rules. The days leading up to the recital were filled with a quiet tension. She practiced every morning, early, when the city was still waking up. She would sit by the window, looking out at the streets, listening to the distant hum of life, and let her fingers move freely over the keys. Sometimes she played exactly what was expected, the simple tune repeated over and over, perfect and predictable. Other times, she let her imagination run wild, transforming the melody into something flowing, surprising, and even a little bold. At night, she could hardly sleep. Thoughts of the recital circled in her mind. What if she made a mistake? What if the audience didn't like her playing? What if she played too much and it seemed inappropriate? And yet, underneath all the worry, there was a spark of excitement. A small voice inside her whispered, "Maybe this is your moment." She thought about the people who might be in the audience. Most of them would be strangers, some older, some young, all with their own lives, their own worries and joys. She imagined their faces, their expressions, as they listened to the piano. Would they notice the small changes she was making? Would they feel the music like she did? Music, after all, was not just notes and rhythm. It was emotion, memory, a story without words. And she wanted, somehow, to tell them a story. On the morning of the recital, she woke early, her hands trembling slightly. She dressed simply in clothes that were comfortable yet neat. She wanted nothing to distract from the music. Breakfast was a quiet affair, a piece of toast and a cup of tea. But even eating felt strange because her mind was elsewhere, already at the piano, already in the hall with an audience waiting. When she arrived at the community hall, it was smaller than she had imagined. A modest stage, chairs arranged in neat rows, a few potted plants for decoration. The organizers greeted her warmly, chatting casually about schedules, timing, and where she should sit before her performance. They mentioned again the simple tune she was supposed to play, as if to reassure themselves that everything was under control. She nodded, smiled, and carried her sheet music to the piano. As she placed her hands on the keys, a quiet hush fell over the room. People were still chatting softly, adjusting their seats, but the moment she touched the piano, it felt as if the world had shifted slightly. All the noise and chatter seemed distant, like the music created its own space, separate from the ordinary. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for just a moment, and began. The first notes were soft, careful, exactly as expected. They floated across the room, gentle and simple, and she felt a small thrill at how easy it was to meet the audience's expectations. The tune was familiar, comforting. Some of the older people in the audience nodded, smiling softly, as if they remembered a simpler time in their own lives. But as her fingers moved, as her confidence grew, she felt the music stirring inside her. The simple tune started to expand. She added small variations, subtle embellishments that gave the melody more life. A trill here, a pause there, a delicate change in rhythm. She didn't realize she was doing it at first. It felt instinctive, natural. The music seemed to take on a personality of its own, something bigger and more expressive than the notes on the page. Her heart beat faster. She glanced briefly at the audience. Some were still adjusting in their seats, but others had stopped talking, their attention drawn to the piano. She could feel their curiosity, their surprise, though none of them could yet know what was coming. And in that moment, she understood something important. The simple tune wasn't just a task to perform. It was an invitation. An invitation to share a part of herself she had always kept hidden as the last notes of the simple melody faded. She paused, unsure if she should continue or stop. The room was quiet now, attentive, waiting. And in that silence, she felt a new courage rising. She knew she could play it safe, finish the tune as expected, and receive polite applause. Or she could take a small risk, let the music breathe, and reveal what she had been keeping inside all these years. She took another breath, letting her fingers hover over the keys. The decision felt heavy and thrilling at the same time. She wasn't just playing notes anymore. She was telling a story, sharing emotions, connecting with strangers through something invisible yet tangible. And for the first time in a long time, she felt completely alive. At that moment, she realized that music wasn't about perfection or meeting expectations. It was about honesty, about courage, about letting others see the pieces of yourself you usually keep hidden. And she was ready. The audience didn't yet know it, but this simple tune was about to become something extraordinary. The days after she agreed to perform were filled with a strange mixture of excitement and nerves. Every morning, she would wake up with the tune playing softly in her mind, looping over and over like a song she could not escape. At first, it made her anxious. It was supposed to be a simple tune, yet she found herself imagining so many ways to play it differently, to add little twists, to make it her own. She knew she had to be careful. The audience expected something simple, something safe, not a display of her hidden talent. But her heart kept whispering that maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to show what she was truly capable of. She spent hours at the piano. Some days, she played exactly what was expected, practicing the tune note by note, making sure every chord sounded clean, every rhythm precise. But other days, when the apartment was quiet and no one could see or hear her, she let herself go. Her fingers moved faster, adding small ornaments, playing with tempo, improvising passages that were no longer part of the original melody. It felt risky, thrilling. She would stop suddenly, breathless, wondering if it was too much. But then her fingers would start moving again, as if they had a life of their own. Her neighbors, who sometimes passed by her door, never suspected the storms of emotion and creativity happening just a few feet away. To them, it was just a quiet apartment in a quiet building. They did not know that within those walls, a small but extraordinary performance was slowly taking shape. She often wondered if she should practice in front of someone, maybe a friend or family member. But she realized she wanted it to be a private journey until the moment she performed. It was her secret, her own little world, and she was not ready to let anyone in yet. Evenings were different. As the sun set and the city's hum softened, she found a new kind of focus. She would light a small lamp by the piano, casting a warm circle of light over the keys. The shadows made her apartment feel larger, more intimate, like the world had shrunk to this tiny island of sound. She would sit for hours, experimenting with dynamics, with how soft notes could sound like whispers and loud notes could feel like declarations. She discovered that a simple tune could carry depth if played with intention, if played with honesty. Every day she discovered something new about the music and about herself. At times, she caught herself imagining the audience's reaction. She pictured people leaning forward in their chairs, eyes wide with curiosity. Maybe some would tap their feet unconsciously. Maybe someone would nod along, smiling at a memory the music evoked. And maybe, just maybe, they would sense the emotion she poured into every note. She thought about the recital hall and the strangers who would soon hear her play. It was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. She wanted to impress them, but more than that, she wanted to connect, to make them feel what she felt when she played. One afternoon, as she was practicing, she made a small mistake. A chord sounded harsh, jarring against the smooth flow of the melody. She froze, heart pounding, staring at her hands as if they had betrayed her. For a moment, frustration and doubt filled her mind. What if I mess up in front of everyone? She wondered. What if I ruin the tune entirely? She pressed her hands back to the keys, this time more slowly, more deliberately, focusing on each note, each breath. And then she realized something important. Mistakes were part of music. They were part of performance. They were part of life. After that, she began to approach her practice differently. Instead of trying to play perfectly, she started to play honestly. She allowed herself to make small mistakes, to experiment, to explore the edges of the simple tune she was expected to play. The music became alive, unpredictable, and deeply satisfying. She noticed that her hands were no longer just following the notes on the page. They were telling a story. And with every passing day, the story became clearer, more personal, more meaningful. Her family noticed her excitement. She didn't talk much about the recital, just smiled often, hummed quietly, disappeared into her apartment for long stretches. They were curious but left her alone, sensing that something important was happening. She appreciated the quiet understanding, the lack of pressure. It allowed her to explore freely without fear of judgment. As the recital approached, her nerves intensified. The last few days were a mix of rigorous practice and restless nights. She would replay the tune in her mind over and over, imagining herself sitting at the piano, imagining the audience, imagining the soft light shining down on her. She wondered how it would feel to be on stage, exposed, her private world suddenly shared with dozens of strangers. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. One evening, she sat at the piano, hands resting on the keys, and took a deep breath. She closed her eyes and remembered the first time she had touched a piano. She was very young, fingers barely able to reach the keys. Yet she had felt an instant connection, a sense of wonder that never faded. She thought about every late night spent practicing alone, every small triumph, every tear shed over a note that wouldn't sound right. And she realized that all of that had prepared her for this moment. She wasn't just playing a tune. She was carrying a lifetime of music, memory, and emotion into the room. She decided to make a small change in her approach. Instead of thinking about the tune as something simple, she would treat it as a canvas, a space where she could express herself freely without breaking the rules. She would honor the melody, but she would also allow herself to explore the spaces between the notes, to play the pauses, to let the music breathe. The thought filled her with confidence. For the first time she felt ready, not just to play but to perform. The night before the recital, sleep came fitfully. She dreamt of the piano, the stage, the audience, the notes flowing in ways both familiar and strange. She woke up multiple times, each time with her fingers tingling, aching to play. She knew that tomorrow would be the moment when everything she had practiced, imagined, and felt would finally meet reality. When she arrived at the recital hall the next morning, it was quiet, almost serene. The staff greeted her warmly, showing her the piano and the space she would perform in. She sat at the instrument, feeling its smooth keys under her fingers, the slight coolness grounding her. The room smelled faintly of polish and wood, of flowers arranged by the organizers. She glanced at the audience seats, still empty, and felt a surge of anticipation. As she waited for the recital to begin, she reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the shy little girl who had first discovered the piano, the anxious teenager who had performed in school recitals, the adult who had spent countless hours practicing alone. All of them had led her to this moment. And she realized that no matter what happened tomorrow, she had already grown through this experience. She had discovered courage, creativity, and the joy of sharing herself through music. Her hands hovered above the keys once more. She took a deep breath, feeling the quiet stillness around her. In that moment, she understood something fundamental. Music was not about perfection. It's not about impressing others, not about following rules. Music was about connection, honesty, and courage. And tomorrow, when she played in front of the audience, she would carry that understanding with her. Even as the first guests began to arrive, chattering softly and finding their seats, she remained calm. She had prepared, she had practiced, and she had discovered the power of her own creativity. The simple tune she was asked to play was no longer just a set of notes. It was a doorway into something much larger, something beautiful, something uniquely her. She smiled to herself, feeling a quiet excitement. The next day, the simple tune would be transformed. She didn't yet know exactly how, but she trusted her instincts. She knew that when her fingers touched the keys in front of the audience, something extraordinary could happen, something that would surprise even her. And with that thought, she took one last look at the piano, closed the lid, and left the hall, ready for whatever the next day would bring. She felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation, but underneath it all was a steady, quiet confidence. She had practiced, she had imagined, and she had discovered the courage to let her music speak. Tomorrow, the audience would hear her. Tomorrow, the simple tune would become a story. And she knew, deep inside, that her music had the power to touch hearts, to surprise, to inspire. The day of the recital had arrived. The sun was shining gently outside, but inside the hall, the air felt heavy with quiet anticipation. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, small bouquets of flowers on the stage, and the faint smell of polished wood lingered in the air. She arrived early, her heart beating faster than usual, carrying a small case with sheet music that she barely needed anymore. Her hands felt slightly clammy as she held it, but she tried to breathe slowly, telling herself that she was ready. She walked toward the piano, each step echoing lightly across the wooden floor. The hall was quiet, almost peaceful. A few organizers moved about, checking lights and sound, making small adjustments. But otherwise, the space seemed to hold its breath, waiting. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the keys, feeling their coolness against her skin. They were familiar, comforting. She sat down on the bench and let her fingers hover above the piano. The audience began to arrive in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. Some greeted friends with smiles. Some found seats and glanced around, curious about who would perform next. She could feel their presence like a soft wave of energy in the room. Even though they were strangers, she felt connected to them somehow, knowing they had come to listen, to experience music in a shared moment. Her stomach fluttered. This was at the moment she had been preparing for, imagining, dreaming about, when the time came. The organizers introduced her with a warm, polite voice. They mentioned the simple tune she had been asked to play, giving the audience a sense of expectation. She walked onto the stage, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. For a brief second, she felt nervous, almost overwhelmed, and she took a deep breath. The lights were soft but bright, highlighting the piano and the space around her. She sat down, straightened her posture, and placed her hands lightly on the keys. The first notes came out soft, careful, just as expected. The simple tune flowed gently across the hall. The audience murmured quietly to themselves, some nodding along, some smiling, recognizing the familiar melody. It was safe, it was predictable, it was exactly what they expected. and for a moment she felt a strange comfort in that. The nerves began to settle slightly. She had started the performance well, but as her fingers moved, she felt the music urging her to go further. The simple tune, which she had played so many times in practice, now seemed to have new life. Her fingers began to explore the keys more freely, adding small ornaments and subtle variations that she hadn't yet shared with anyone. The rhythm shifted slightly, the notes sang in a softer, richer tone, and for a moment, she felt like the piano was responding to her thoughts directly. She glanced briefly at the audience. Some were still adjusting in their seats, unaware of the subtle changes she was introducing. Others had stopped talking, their attention drawn to the music. She could sense their curiosity, their growing interest, though none of them yet realized that the simple tune was no longer simple. It had begun to transform under her hands. Her heart raced as she continued. She added small pauses that made the melody feel like it was breathing. She stretched certain notes, letting them linger in the air longer than expected. Her fingers danced lightly over the keys, adding delicate trills and gentle flourishes. The music became more expressive, more emotional, and she felt a surge of excitement. For the first time, she wasn't just performing a tune, she was telling a story, and the audience was becoming part of it. The hall was quiet now, completely attentive. She could feel the energy shift. The soft whispers of curiosity had disappeared, replaced by stillness, as if everyone was holding their breath to hear what would happen next. She had learned during her practice that music had this power, the power to make people stop, to listen, to feel, and she realized in that moment that she was capable of creating that feeling. She glanced down at her hands, amazed at how naturally they moved. The simple tune was becoming something entirely different. Notes she had never played before slipped seamlessly into the melody. Harmonies that she had imagined in quiet moments now flowed freely. Her emotions poured into every movement, shaping the music, giving it depth and meaning. She could feel the audience reacting subtly, the way their heads tilted slightly, the way some leaned forward, their eyes wide with attention. A small, unexpected thought crossed her mind. What if I go too far? What if it's too much? But she quickly dismissed it. She had practiced this music. She had imagined this moment countless times, and now she trusted herself. Music was not about following rules perfectly. It was about feeling, expressing, connecting. And that was exactly what she was doing. The tune, though familiar, now sounded entirely new. It had softness and strength, stillness and motion, simplicity and complexity all at once. Her hands moved faster in some passages, lighter in others, shifting the mood subtly but noticeably. She could hear the faint gasps, the quiet exclamations of surprise, the way some faces seemed to widen with fascination. The music was alive, and so was the room. She felt a thrill she had never experienced before. Her nerves, which had been so tense earlier, had transformed into energy, into a sense of purpose. She was no longer just playing notes. She was sharing herself. Every pause, every trill, every gentle touch on the keys was a piece of her imagination, a piece of her courage. She realized that this was what it meant to perform, not to impress, not to seek approval, but to give something honest, something real, something unforgettable. The tune began to rise, slowly building toward a crescendo. She could feel the music gathering strength, carrying the audience along with it, guiding them through emotions she could not yet put into words. Some eyes glistened with wonder, some lips parted slightly in surprise. The simple tune was no longer simple, it was a story unfolding in real time, created in a space where time seemed to slow down. She paused for a breath, letting the last note linger in the air. The silence that followed was deep and profound, heavier than anything she had ever experienced. She could hear her own heartbeat, fast and steady, and she could feel the audience holding theirs as well. It was a moment suspended between what was expected and what was possible. She had crossed a boundary, and the audience knew it. Then she continued. She allowed herself to explore even more, taking small risks, letting the music flow into places she hadn't tried before. The melody twisted and turned, danced and shimmered, rose and fell. She could feel the excitement building, the connection deepening. The audience was no longer just watching, they were experiencing, feeling. Traveling through the story she was telling without words, she remembered her long hours of practice. The quiet nights, the lonely moments when no one could hear her play. All of that had led to this. Every small note, every imperfect attempt, every experiment had prepared her for this exact moment. And now, as she played, she felt gratitude for the music, for the opportunity, for the courage to follow her instincts, the simple tune, which had seemed so modest and unremarkable at the start, now carried the weight of emotion, of imagination, of personal expression. She felt it in her bones, in her fingers, in her heart. She knew that what she was creating was fleeting, it existed only in this space, in this moment, shared between her and the audience, and that made it even more precious, even more alive. As she finished this first part of her performance, she noticed small smiles spreading through the audience, quiet exclamations of surprise, eyes widening with wonder. She had not expected such immediate reactions, yet they encouraged her, spurred her on. She felt a surge of energy, a mixture of relief and exhilaration. She had taken the first step, and it had been more powerful than she could have imagined. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a brief moment. Catching her breath, listening to the soft echoes of the last note, the audience remained quiet, absorbed, waiting for what would come next. She knew that she had their attention, their curiosity, and most importantly, their openness. And in that silence, she found courage. She was no longer playing a simple tune for a small recital. She was sharing her voice, her creativity, her very self. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive on stage. The nerves that had plagued her during practice and preparation had transformed into something entirely different: energy, focus, and a quiet thrill of possibility. She could sense the audience leaning in, even if subtly drawn into the music, caught in the moment with her. She felt connected to them in a way she had never experienced before. The simple tune had become something extraordinary, something that could not be predicted or replicated. It had become a reflection of her imagination, her courage, and her ability to share her emotions without words. And as she prepared to continue, she felt ready for whatever came next. The audience had no idea what they were about to hear, and neither did she fully, but that uncertainty was part of the beauty, part of the thrill, part of the magic of performing. And in that moment, seated at the piano, fingers hovering above the keys, she realized something fundamental. Music, like life, was about taking risks, about trusting yourself, about daring to express what is inside, even if it surprises the world. And she was ready to do just that. The music had begun to flow freely now, no longer confined by the simple tune she was expected to play. Her fingers moved faster, lighter, and more confidently, gliding across the keys with a rhythm that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Every note was intentional, yet alive, full of energy and emotion. The hall was silent, except for the piano, which seemed to sing on its own, filling every corner with sound that felt bigger than the small space. She glanced at the audience. Without breaking concentration, some faces were wide-eyed with surprise, some whispered softly to themselves, as if they could not believe what they were hearing. Others were completely still, leaning forward in their chairs, captivated by the unexpected richness and complexity that had emerged from a tune they thought would be simple and predictable. She felt a thrill at their reactions, but she did not stop. She had started this journey, and now she would follow it wherever it led. Her fingers danced, weaving the original melody into a tapestry of sound that she had never dared to play in public before. She added chords that deepened the emotion, and subtle shifts in tempo made the melody feel alive, breathing in the space between notes. She was improvising, yet it did not feel reckless. Every addition, every change, was an instinctive choice, a reflection of the years she had spent secretly exploring music alone. The audience began to notice the transformation. What had started as a simple tune now soared and dipped, twisted and turned like a story unfolding in real time. Some leaned closer, trying to catch every nuance, Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling emotions they did not expect to feel in a small recital hall. The energy in the room shifted. The simple tune had become something extraordinary. The audience could sense it. Her heart beat faster, but not with fear. It was excitement, joy, and a deep sense of freedom. She had crossed a line she had long feared, one she had imagined countless times, but never dared to step past. The piano responded to her thoughts, her emotions, her imagination. She had created something new, something bold, something that belonged entirely to her. A small smile appeared on her face as she continued. She allowed herself to take risks, to play passages she had only dreamed of playing in private. Notes that danced unpredictably, but beautifully. Each chord resonated, each trill shimmered, each pause held weight. The music was alive, and she felt as if the hall itself was breathing with her. She could hear subtle reactions from the audience, soft gasps, whispered wows, the occasional intake of breath. They were not expecting this. Neither had she fully known what would happen, and yet it was perfect. The simple tune was now almost unrecognizable. It had transformed into a rich, emotional story, flowing seamlessly between moments of gentleness and bursts of energy. She allowed herself to close her eyes, letting her imagination guide her fingers. Every note was connected to a memory, a feeling, a hope. She remembered the long nights of practice, the years of private exploration, the quiet moments when no one could hear her. All of that had prepared her for this moment. She noticed the small details in the audience. Some had tears in their eyes. Some had their hands gently clasped. Some were leaning forward, completely absorbed. It was as if the music had reached inside them, pulling out emotions they had not expected to feel. She realized then that she was not just performing. She was connecting, creating something shared and powerful. The room was no longer just a recital hall. It had become a space of emotion, imagination, and wonder. Built entirely from her courage and her music, the improvisation continued, building toward a climax that felt inevitable, yet exhilarating. She added faster runs, light and delicate, that sparkled like sunlight on water. She introduced moments of silence, letting the echo of previous notes hang in the air. Drawing attention to the depth of the melody, the audience was completely captivated, leaning into every nuance, listening as if the music were telling them a story about life itself. Her breathing became steady, controlled, yet full of energy. She realized that she was no longer thinking about the tune she had been asked to play. It had served its purpose as a starting point, a spark, a doorway. What mattered now was the music that flowed from her, alive and authentic. Every note, every chord, every subtle shift in rhythm was a piece of herself. She was sharing with the world for the first time. The energy in the room built as the improvisation reached its peak. The notes became bold, confident, yet still delicate, full of complexity and emotion. The audience responded subtly but powerfully. Some gasped quietly, some murmured in awe, some simply sat, frozen, unable to tear their eyes from her hands as they moved across the keys. She could feel the electricity in the room, the shared emotion, the connection between herself and strangers who had come to hear a simple tune. For a brief moment, she paused, letting her hands hover over the keys. The hall was quiet, every listener holding their breath. And then she continued, softer now, slower, allowing the melody to descend gently, to transform the excitement into something more intimate, more personal. She added small ornaments, gentle flourishes, subtle changes in tempo that made the music feel alive, almost like it were breathing. She opened her eyes and glanced at the audience. She could see the astonishment on their faces, the surprise, the delight. They had expected something simple. They had expected predictability. Instead, they were witnessing something beautiful, something unique, something they would not forget. And she felt a mixture of exhilaration and humility. She had shared herself fully, without fear, without apology. The final notes approached. She allowed the music to slow, to soften, to linger in the air. Each key was pressed carefully, intentionally, letting the resonance fill the hall one last time. The audience sat in silence, savoring the moment, unsure if they should clap or speak, afraid to disturb the delicate beauty that had just unfolded. She could feel the emotion in the room, the connection she had created, the power of taking a risk and trusting herself. And then, with one final gentle chord, the performance ended. The hall remained quiet for a heartbeat, suspended between what had been and what was about to happen. And then came the applause. Slow at first, tentative, then growing louder, stronger, more enthusiastic. People stood, clapping, smiling, some even whispering to their neighbors in awe. The sound was overwhelming, joyous, affirming. She had done more than play a simple tune. She had created a moment that would stay with the audience long after the recital ended. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted them from the keys. She felt a rush of relief, of joy, of gratitude. She had shared her music, her imagination, her courage, and it had been received in a way she had never dared to imagine. She realized that this moment, this connection, was why she had spent years practicing alone, dreaming, imagining, creating. The organizers approached her with astonishment and admiration. They could not hide their surprise at what they had just witnessed. The audience was still clapping, some standing, some wiping tears, some simply staring in awe. She smiled, feeling warmth, pride, and humility all at once. She had done what she had never thought possible, turned a simple tune into something extraordinary, something alive, something unforgettable. As she walked off the stage, she felt lighter than she had in years. The nerves, the anxiety, the preparation, they had all led to this moment. She had trusted herself, trusted her music, and the result had been magical. She knew that this experience would change her, that she had crossed a boundary she had long feared, and that she would never look at a simple tune the same way again, even after leaving the stage. The applause continued, echoing through the hall. People came forward to congratulate her, to share their astonishment, their joy, their gratitude for the music they had just experienced. She listened, smiling, responding softly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. For the first time, she understood that music was more than notes, more than practice, more than performance. It was connection, courage, and the courage to share yourself fully with the world. That night, after the hall had emptied and the lights were dimmed, she sat at the piano once more, alone. She let her fingers rest on the keys, feeling the echo of the day, the memory of every note, every emotion, every connection. She realized that she had not only stunned the audience, but she had also stunned herself. She had discovered a part of herself she had long kept hidden, a part that could take a simple tune and turn it into something breathtaking, something unforgettable. And as she sat there, listening to the silent resonance of the piano, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the music, for the courage, for the opportunity, and for the knowledge that she had finally shared her true voice with the world.